Leadership is a fascinating thing. We recognize leadership when we see it. It's easy to recognize, but it's so hard to learn. It's so hard to teach or implement. But I think one thing we all agree on, everyone needs leaders. Leadership is vital in the field of business, science, technology, war, whatever. It's my view that leadership is what makes societies progress, make them move forward. But what makes a great leader? I've been fascinated with leadership most of my life. And today it's my privilege to share my views on leadership today. So, consider these leaders. What do they have in common? Very different leaders, very different leadership styles. You have Bill Clinton, the late Steve Jobs, Winston Churchill, King Abdulaziz, also known as Ibn Saud, the founder of modern Saudi Arabia. Even Hitler's up there, Mother Teresa, Mandela, Ghandi. Very different leaders, very different leadership styles, different eras, ideologies, nationalities, religions, but as leaders, they all had something in common. They all had the ability to connect to people's emotions. And that's the first secret of leadership. To become an effective leader, you must make an emotional connection with people, to connect to their feelings and emotions. What kind of emotions? Anger, happiness, fear, love, hate, resentment, feeling of belonging, hope, all powerful emotions, or words that evoke powerful emotions. A good leader connects to these emotions. Some people call it empathy. Other leadership experts say it's the ability to listen. Either way, you have to connect to people's emotions. Why? Because the deepest need of the human heart is to be understood. Human beings are primarily emotional beings. We are logical beings second. We make decisions using emotions and justify with logic. Great leaders understand this, understand the importance of emotional connections. Hitler, no doubt considered one of the most evil people in the 20th century, responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. But here's the fascinating thing is, he was elected into power. In the early 1930s, Hitler was elected. And the question is why? Why did they elect such a, what we consider as a madman today? You have to look at the context. After World War I, Germany felt humiliated. Germans felt angry, they felt humiliated. The economy was in shambles, the currency was absolutely worthless. People resented the Versailles Treaty. And here came this radical, and he said, I believe in you, I connect with you. I can understand your frustration. We've seen the videos, we've seen Hitler's speeches. They look like the ramblings of a madman, but then it mattered. People believed in him. And what's fascinating with him is that people followed him until the final days. Some people until the final moments, after he started wars, after he's become responsible for all this madness and all this killing, people still followed him. Why? Because they believed in him, because he connected with people. Another leader who was very good at connecting to people's emotions was Winston Churchill. In June 1940, Britain was expecting an attack from Nazi Germany, any minute now. And during a 5-week period, Winston Churchill gave 3 key speeches. One of them today is referred to as the "We Shall Fight" speech. And in the speech, he said, I'll read this for a moment, "We shall fight in France, we shall fight on the seas and oceans, we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight in the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." He used the words "we shall fight" 6 times in this paragraph and ended with the words "we shall never surrender." What this speech was about was lifting Britain. People were afraid, people were frustrated. The Germans are coming. And he said, "We shall fight." Emotional connection. And the message was to his people and to the Germans. We shall fight. We shall never surrender. It's about emotions. Second trait of great leaders is they have a cause and/or a strategic enemy. Some people define leadership as aligning people towards a common goal, a common cause. Consider this great man. What was his cause? Liberty, freedom, the liberation of 360 million people. When the cause is big enough, millions or tens of millions, or in his case, hundreds of millions of people will follow you. That's the power of having a cause or a strategic enemy. He had a strategic enemy, George W. Bush. What does the war on terror even mean? Till today, I'm not even sure what that means. But it worked. People followed him, and he got elected twice. The second time, well, but he got elected, and it worked. And it's a vague concept. But again, the context, 9/11, we have to look at it from that perspective. Having a strategic enemy works. What about their cause? ISIS. A barbarous, murderous group of people. How are they so successful at attracting impressionable young Muslims? The cause, for glory, for God, for the reinstatement of the Islamic Caliphate. It's hard to compete with that. And what do governments do in response? Don't be a terrorist. For God and glory versus don't be a terrorist. It's no contest. The youth, Muslim youths are often frustrated, they're disenfranchised, they need a new cause. They need a reinterpretation to the proper Islamic values. Third leadership trait, great leaders make others around them feel special. And I love what Mother Teresa said about this. She said, let no one ever come to you without leaving better and happier. Be the living expression of God's kindness. Kindness in your face, kindness in your eyes, kindness in your smile. Leadership is a group effort. In my view, a leader often gets a disproportionate amount of the credit and a disproportionate amount of the blame as well. Great leaders make others around them feel special and let others around them feel appreciated. It is said that when Bill Clinton shakes your hand, he makes you feel like you are the only person that matters in the whole world. I've read this before, I've heard about this. It's called the reality distortion field. And I've not had the opportunity to meet him myself, but I've asked people that have met him, I said, is this true? And they said, absolutely. When this man shakes your hand, it feels like nothing else in the world matters. He knows how to make people around him feel special using an RDF, a reality distortion field. One of the people that was remarkably good at this was the late Dr. Ghazi Algosaibi, my late father. He was a government minister, ambassador, novelist, poet, academic. Many considered him to be a great leader. I think what made him so successful is the ability to make people around him feel special. And I've had the privilege of seeing him interact with all kinds of people. I've seen him with kings, princes, and VIPs, and I've seen him with his subordinates. I've seen him with his domestic staff, his cook and his driver. And what I thought is fascinating is that there's very little difference between how he treated the VIP and his subordinate. He made sure people around him feel special. People wanted to be around him. And I think this is one of the biggest secrets of his success. He tried to make everyone around him feel special. Some people call it charm or charisma. You don't need to be charming per se. You just need to make those around you feel special. Show them appreciation. Fourth leadership trait. Great leaders have strong values and stick to them no matter what. On the 1st of December 1955, Rosa Parks got on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She sat in the colored section. A white passenger came to her and asked her to give up her seat, and she refused. Now, in the 1950s southern US, if a white passenger asks you to get up, you get up. But she refused. Why? Because of her values. It went against her values. I'm not giving up my seat. This is wrong. And she knew the consequences because she was arrested. But she made it her life's work. She became an activist all her life, and years later, the US Congress would call her the first lady of civil rights in the US. It's her values. Last year, in Ramadan, a group of us, friends and members of the Bahrain Foundation, decided to hold Sunni-Shia joint prayers. This was the first time in a long time this was done. We did this in response to the terrible terrorist attacks that happened in the eastern province in Saudi and in Kuwait, where terrorists blew themselves up inside mosques. They wanted to create fitna, or what we call in Arabic social discord. Why did we do it? We did it because of our values. It was the right thing to do. We got praised a lot for it, and we got criticized as well. But the praise and the criticism and the attacks don't matter. Our values guided us. It was the right thing to do. And we wanted to send a message to the terrorists. No, we are one people. Regardless, we are all Muslims, Sunnis, Shias, whatever. We all pray to the same God, and we pray to the same Qibla in Mecca. Our values guided us. Fifth leadership trait. Great leaders have great discipline. You'll be hard-pressed to find a leader, an effective leader, that doesn't have great discipline. And I love what George Washington said about this. He said, "Nothing is more harmful to the service than the neglect of discipline. For that discipline, more than numbers, gives one army superiority over another." This is a man who managed to defeat the British Empire, who managed to help start a nation and became its first president. You don't achieve this without having extreme discipline. And this is true in the corporate world as well. The CEOs of Apple, Disney, Starbucks, Procter & Gamble, you name it, the best top corporate leaders, they're all up and running by 5 a.m. And I'm convinced that their personal discipline is connected to the success of their companies. Sixth leadership trait. Great leaders develop and maintain relationships. This is wonderfully exemplified by these amazing two men, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa and Mr. Rolf Mayer. In the early 90s, this is when this picture was taken, in the early 90s in South Africa, during the transition to democracy, Mr. Mandela and Mr. de Klerk during negotiations would often have breakdowns and deadlocks. You know, two big men, big egos, different views, can be stubborn sometimes, and you'd have deadlock. Enter these two men. They'd meet on the sidelines and smooth things over. And the fascinating thing is, very different backgrounds, different ideologies. In fact, they were supposed to be enemies, but they developed a relationship and a friendship despite of their differences, and they managed to overcome all obstacles. South Africa wouldn't be what it is today and wouldn't have transitioned if it wasn't for these two historic figures that made it happen. In fact, relationships is so important that one leadership academy in the UK defines leadership as being relationships. Great leaders develop and maintain relationships. Seventh trait. Great leaders value forgiveness and compassion. At the age of 26, in 1902, a young Ibn Saud recaptured the city of Riyadh from his enemies, the Al-Rashid tribe. The first thing the young man did is grant his defeated foe amnesty. He granted them amnesty. And as he expanded, and as he started building this young nation, every time he conquered a city or a tribe or an area or a region or whatever, he would always forgive his enemies. Always. Always. And sometimes he was betrayed by members of his own family. He would forgive and move forward. Why did he do this? Two reasons. One, he believed in the Islamic values of compassion and forgiveness. He was driven by his Islamic beliefs, true Islamic beliefs. And second, it was politically shrewd to do. You can't build a nation while looking over your shoulder all the time, but you can do it with allies that you've forgiven and forged strong relationships with. Great leaders have passion and forgiveness. And of course, someone we all greatly admire is the late Nelson Mandela. And he said, "When I walked out of prison, that was my mission, to liberate the oppressed and the oppressor both." It's very obvious to want to liberate the oppressed, but to have so much compassion, so much foresight, such a big heart to actually have room for the oppressed, because the oppressor is in a prison of his own hatred. He needs to be released from that prison of their own hatred. And that's what made him a remarkable leader. And I want to end on this note. The greatest leadership secret is to have compassion. The Arab world is in dire straits. We have civil wars, sectarianism, all kinds of conflict. But the conflict is also rising around the world. Tensions are rising around the world. And even in the US, anti-Islamic sentiment is rising. What can people like us do that aren't leaders? We don't have to wait for leaders. If enough of us treated our fellow human being with dignity and with compassion, the world would be a much, much better place. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.